Okay, welcome to this lecture video. So over the next chapter, we'll talk about both lymphatic system and then also our immune system. Uh, I want to spend this video, however, focusing on the lymphatic system. We'll talk about the functions a little bit and then spend the rest of the time on this recording looking at the different components that make up the lymphatic system. So we'll talk about the lymph itself, the vessels that are involved, and also lymphoid organs. So let's make a start. So when we were talking about the cardiovascular system, one of the things that we saw was that this is a one-way system, and this serves as a closed loop system. However, even though it is a closed loop, in fact, some of the fluid does actually leak out from these blood vessels, and it now becomes interstitial fluid. So this is the fluid that we find between the cells. And if we do not pick it up, we would end up developing an edema, which you can see on this slide on the left-hand side. So this is the swelling of the tissues due to the fluid building up between the cells. And in order to prevent this, we have to drain this fluid that leaks out. And that's really where the lymphatic system steps in and serves such an important job in our day-to-day life. So let's talk a little bit about the functions of the lymphatic system, and there's going to be three that I want to highlight for us. The first one is exactly what we saw in the previous slide in relation to preventing the formation of the edema due to the buildup of fluid to this interstitial space. So we're using lymphatic system to move fluids from one body compartment to another so that we can retain that state of homeostasis. The second point that I've highlighted here is something that sometimes surprises my students, and we'll get to talk more about that once we get to the digestive system, but I'll mention it at this time as well. Interestingly, many dietary fats are much larger than what can be picked up by cardiovascular system's capillaries, especially within the abdominal area. So for this reason, it is the lymphatic vessels that pick up these large dietary fat molecules, and then they get transported and dumped to the cardiovascular system right close to the heart. Function of the lymphatic system. I've not highlighted it on this because we're going to spend a whole separate video talking about it, but we see that the lymphatic system also plays really important role in the immune system. In a sense, you can consider it as providing the structures within which the immune system works at. And like I said, we'll focus on a whole separate video on that. When it comes to the parts of the lymphatic system, this really provides us a rather nice outline for what I want to cover on this session with you. So lymph is really in its composition exactly similar as our blood plasma's composition is. And that's also the same as the composition of the interstitial fluid, so the fluid between the cells. So all of these share nearly the same composition, but they're named differently based on at what location we're seeing this liquid. The composition of the lymph, like I said, very similar to the blood plasma with the fluid between the cells. But the difference is that we also see within the lymph white blood cells, and we see them actually quite a numerous amount. Lymph should never contain red blood cells. That would be a concern for us. And on this screen, what you're seeing is a vial of a lymph. You'll notice that it's kind of a opaque, whitish mixture. So that gives you a good idea of how it might appear. So let's start with the lymphatic vessels. And in many ways, these lymphatic vessels are similar to the cardiovascular system vessels, but there are few differences. So let's have a look of that. First thing to notice is that the lymphatic system is not a closed loop. Rather, it is open from one end, and this is the end that picks up the fluid from here where it leaks to the capillaries of the cardiovascular system, to the interstitial space. So that's where we're seeing that the lymphatic vessels are open at that end. We also see that lymphatic vessels are much more permeable vessels than the vessels that we see in cardiovascular system. And finally, we do see that there's a similarity in the lymphatic vessels with our veins of the cardiovascular system. So we see low pressure within these. We see that they do also have valves, and we also see that they get squeezed by skeletal muscles. So this process of venous return, the milking action as the skeletal muscles pushed these vessels to move the fluid inside back towards the heart, often against the gravity. We'll also notice the important roles of valves in that. Now I wanted to go through the different vessels, starting with lymphatic capillaries. These are found typically where the cardiovascular system capillaries are at. So their role was really to drain those tissues from that fluid that leaks out from the cardiovascular system. And just like cardiovascular system capillaries, these are very permeable, and in fact, they are even more permeable than the capillaries of the cardiovascular system. Another thing that we see with the lymphatic capillaries is that they are also able to handle much larger molecules. And this can be either good or bad, depending on what we're dealing with. So it would be good in a sense, for example, that we can pick up these large dietary fat molecules and transport them then to the cardiovascular system. So we're able to capitalize on the resources from there. The bad side, I guess, would be when a pathogen enters into the lymphatic system, it pretty much is able to then spread around the body. So this is something to keep on mind. And if you have ever wondered what these ends of the lymphatic capillaries look like, here we have a picture on the top right side of the screen. So we see that these walls overlap to form these flap-like mini valves. We also see that the fluid leaks into these capillaries, and then these capillaries are anchored to the connective tissue by filaments. We'll end up seeing that there's a higher pressure on the inside that then ends up closing these mini valves so that the leakage is not out from the capillaries, it's into the capillaries and then up the capillaries. And we'll also see that this fluid is forced then along the vessel, like I said, and until it gets dumped next to the heart, back to the cardiovascular system. And then we have many different kinds of vessels that feed into each other. We can see that from the smaller capillaries, once multiple of them join together, they form bigger lymphatic vessels. And then multiple lymphatic vessels join together to form lymphatic trunks. And eventually those join in forming into lymphatic ducts. So it's almost like this tree-like structure, but in this case, we're moving from smaller branches to bigger and bigger and bigger ones. If we think of the roles of the collecting vessels of the lymphatic system, they really do collect the lymph from the lymphatic capillaries, and they carry the lymph to and away from the lymph nodes. And it's worthwhile to notice that they also return fluid to circulatory veins near the heart, like I mentioned. So there's 2 points. The right lymphatic duct drains the lymph from the right arm and the right side of the head and thorax, whereas the thoracic duct drains the lymph from the rest of the body. And here I provided you a diagram of some of the most important trunks and ducts when it comes to the lymphatic system. So with that all said, let's move on and have a look of our lymph nodes. These are mostly kidney-shaped in terms of their shape. They're less than about 1 inch in size. And often we see that lymph nodes are located in clusters along the lymphatic vessels. So some older anatomy textbooks that I've used describe these as pearl necklace in its appearance. I think that's a little bit more romantic description than what I would use. And we end up seeing that these lymph nodes are found within connective tissue, often close to the body surfaces, so they can be palpated. This is what the physicians use to feel if the lymph nodes are swollen. And if they are swollen, that's because there's a lot of white blood cells inside, which would be a sign of activation of our immune system. And we can name regions where lymph nodes are commonly found. So we see our cervical lymph nodes at the neck, axillary lymph nodes at the armpit, supratrochlear lymph nodes above the trochlear notch, inguinal lymph nodes at the groin region, and then abdominal lymph nodes are at the area where the digestive system structures are located, and thoracic lymph nodes at the chest cavity. So the role of the lymph nodes really is to filter the lymph before it is returned to the blood. Many harmful materials can be captured or filtered out of the lymph. So we see, for example, bacteria, viruses, cancer cells, and also old parts of cells that get removed. And we find within the lymph nodes these defense cells within the lymph nodes. So we see macrophages, these engulf and destroy bacteria, viruses, and other foreign substances in the lymph. And then we see lymphocytes, which respond to foreign substances in the lymph. So let's look inside a lymph node. So lymph node can be divided into compartments by these trabeculae, and we see that we have cortex, the outer part. Within there, this contains follicles. These are collections of lymphocytes. And we also see germinal centers that enlarge when antibodies are being released by plasma cells. In addition to that, we see the medulla, which is the inner part, and this contains phagocytotic macrophages. Now let's look at the flow of lymph through the lymph nodes. So lymph enters to the convex side through afferent lymphatic vessels, and then the lymph flows through a number of sinuses inside the node. Finally, lymph exits through the efferent lymphatic vessels. Because there are fewer efferent and afferent vessels, the flow of the lymph really is slowed as it moves through the lymph node. And finally, before we wrap up today on this video, I wanted to talk about several other lymphoid organs that we have in addition to the lymph nodes. These contribute to the lymphatic function. So let's review those next. So thymus is found overlying the heart, and it functions at its peak levels only during the youth. Interestingly enough, as you age, the anatomical structure of thymus gets replaced by adipose tissue and connective tissue, even though the thymus will still keep functioning. Then let's have a look at the spleen. Spleen is located on the left side of the abdomen. It filters and cleans the blood of bacteria, viruses, and also old particles. And you can see the rich blood flow into the spleen through splenial artery and vein on that picture on the left-hand side. Spleen provides a site for the lymphocyte proliferation and immune surveillance. It also destroys worn-out blood cells and forms blood cells in the fetal development. In addition to that, spleen really acts as a blood reservoir when we need to add additional blood to the circulation. Then let's have a look at tonsils. Tonsils are small masses of lymphoid tissue deep to the mucosa surrounding the pharynx, so the throat region. These are responsible for trapping and removing bacteria and other foreign pathogens. And tonsillitis results when the tonsils become congested with the bacteria. So as a result, the tonsils will swell, and in some patients, we do remove those tonsils then. Let's talk about appendix briefly. Appendix is the first part of large intestines, and it can get inflamed. And in response to that, sometimes we do end up removing the appendix as well. When we talk about that you can live perfectly fine without appendix, I guess that raises the question that why do we have it then? If it can get inflamed, there can be problems. Well, our best theories at the moment are proposing that appendix is an evolutionary remnant from that time when we had more of a different diet and we needed to host bacteria to help with the digesting that kind of a diet in the history of mankind. I wanted to finish off by talking about Peyer's patches. These are found in the walls of the small intestines. They're similar to the lymphoid follicles that are found in the appendix. And what we see is that macrophages capture and destroy bacteria in the intestines with these Peyer's patches. And that really brings us to the end of this recording. As always, I appreciate you and I look forward to seeing you at our next recording.